Good evening, everyone. He has turned grief into a relentless search for answers. One man is calling on lawmakers to better protect domestic violence victims.
Last night, we shared the story of Marie Varsos and Debbie Sisco, who were killed by Marie's husband nearly a year ago. News Channel 5 investigative reporter Levi Ismail is here to share more. Levi, the family is now working with lawmakers to make sure that something like this never happens again.
You know, Vicki, we actually followed Marie's brother, who traveled here from San Francisco to share his emotional story with lawmakers himself. Before, may have been about how we got here, but the past few weeks has been about where we're headed and how we can better protect victims.
And that's what brings me before you here today.
Up until now, it's been emails and phone calls.
Pleasure to meet you.
But this day,
Hi, Senator. How are you? Nice to meet you in person.
Don't bite.
required some FaceTime.
One meeting after another here, huh?
Yeah, it seems like every 15 minutes we're meeting with someone.
Alex Yon came a long way from his home in San Francisco, but the Nashville native knows this
Again, man, I appreciate it.
is how you remind lawmakers that their bills
I could not thank you enough for everything that you have done. And
represent real people with real issues.
You will never know the lives that you save through your testimony and through sharing what your family has gone through.
These are the lawmakers who've either sponsored or paved the way for bills inspired by the story of Marie Varsos and Debbie Sisco. A story Alex has told before,
Give us your name for the record and make sure your microphone is on.
but never like this.
And last April, my mother, Debbie Sisco, and my sister, Marie Varsos, were murdered by my brother-in-law. And over the following 5 weeks until their homicide, my sister, my mother, myself, and the rest of our family did everything we could to navigate the very bureaucratic process domestic violence face every day here in Tennessee.
The latest report from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations shows that law enforcement responded to more than 69,000 domestic violence cases in 2020. In total, 90 victims were murdered.
I think when we have a case like Marie and Debbie's, we realize that there are still gaps and holes in this system.
Kathy Walsh is the executive director for the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic Violence and Alex's guide. Together, they drafted 4 bills, each with a focus on different loopholes that lawmakers say we must close.
That the system just did not work right.
The first makes it mandatory for law enforcement serving an order of protection to check for outstanding warrants. Shirley Bean of the Davidson County Sheriff's Office says they did so in Sean's case, but his warrants from Metro Nashville Police the night Marie was assaulted back in March had yet to appear in their system, which is why Sean walked through these doors, was served by a deputy, and walked out despite 2 warrants for his arrest.
I think those procedures do work, but over time you will, as things happen, you do have to kind of sort of modify certain things.
Bean says they agreed to meet with police and find better ways to communicate over these warrants since, at the moment, there's no policy that says they have to collaborate. Another bill requires law enforcement to make it simpler so victims are notified of updates once the order of protection is served, the offender is arrested and/or released, which Marie made it clear to deputies she was hardly told anything.
I wanted to make sure my contact info was correct because both times when he was served with order protection and when he was arrested, I never got a notification.
While some of these things may seem like they're small, when it comes to domestic violence homicides, these are things that could really save somebody's life.
When Sean was arrested for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and false imprisonment, he paid $3,000 of his $30,000 bond. One bill requires bail set at no less than twice what's standard in cases where the victim is strangled or there's been a threat against their life. GPS tracking would then be required and paid for by the offender as a condition of bail.
All we want to do is make sure that your family's loss is not in vain. And I think these bills genuinely help with that. I really do, man.
Police say Sean waited outside Debbie's home for 45 minutes on April 12, 2021, before shooting and killing both women. Alex says GPS tracking could have warned his family before it was too late.
I think that your bill in particular is the one thing that could have saved him. I really do.
Connecticut is one example of where GPS tracking has shown promise. When they launched their pilot program, they tracked 168 high-risk domestic violence offenders. In 3 years, not one had re-injured or killed victims.
The technology already exists in counties like Davidson. It's just rarely, if ever, used in domestic cases. Now, some lawmakers here were nervous about any unintended consequences of such a bill, much less paying for it. Others say it needs to be broadened to apply to more domestic violence offenders.
which is great news to me, and I would love to see that happen.
This may be a time for questions, but it's also a time for answers as we close in on 1 year since that tragic day. A day Alex won't forget, and he hopes lawmakers won't either. Not because these bills can bring Marie and Debbie back, but they may save someone from the same fate.
I think at the end of the day, what I'm kind of constantly thinking about is making sure that someone else doesn't have to experience what my family went through.
Levi, it's such a personal mission for him.
Absolutely.
Do we know where these bills stand right now?
Well, actually, these bills are still under consideration by lawmakers at this point. Many of them have actually passed subcommittees. You know, Kathy and Alex are urging Tennesseans right now to call their legislators and tell them we need these bills for our state to begin taking domestic violence more seriously.
And we'll keep tracking it, right?
Absolutely.
Thanks, Levi.